Alright, let's continue where we left off in our last video on the east side of Huron Avenue. And the next building we want to look at is this building right here, which has been nicely restored. In the early 80s it was a CVS drugstore, but the store that most of my generation remember being there is Newberry 5 and 10 cent store. And looking at the facade on this building, it looks like it's seen its better days. It looks much better today, actually. We had 3 5 and 10 cent stores in Port Huron. We had Woolworths and Kresge's and Newberry's. I think that Kresge's and Woolworths looked on Newberry's as their poor cousin. I mean, they had their wooden floors and they didn't have as big a store and their selection wasn't as great. But it was still a wonderful place to shop. And they had the basement for discounts and so forth. You had the popcorn you could smell as you walked in the store. It was a wonderful experience. In this picture here, my friend Catherine Rich is walking down the street with her mother in front of the Newberry store. Many people have pictures like this in their home. The focus of it was people, but if you look in the background, that's where it becomes interesting as far as the historical value to Port Huron. This gives you a good view of the signage of Newberry's. The thing that I'll always remember about Newberry's is the back of it. They had a steel door that opened right out onto the sidewalk, a lawsuit waiting to happen. My dad and I were walking down Michigan Street and got almost to that door and somebody brought it open really quick and hit me right in the head with it. The next thing I remember, I was on the soda fountain putting ice on my head. If that were to happen today, I'd have a few more dollars in my pocket, I think. This photo was taken in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But you can see that from this insert that it's the same building as it is today. But in this photo, the building actually housed 2 businesses. Here we see Mahar Shoes on the southern end of the building. And you can see the bargains here. Children's shoes for $0.25, boys for $1, and adults for $3 to $3.50. I think I paid almost $100 for my last pair of shoes. And it appears that Mahar Shoes is running a special promotion out front, giving away free apples on Apple Day. Now you have to admit, they sold some pretty snazzy shoes. Before Mahar Shoes, it was occupied by Charles Gleason and Company, General Merchandise. And next door to Mahar Shoes on the northern end was the Penny and Candy Works. North of the old Newberry store, it gets a little confusing because of the Kresge building. It changed size over the years. On the right, you see the old Newberry's building. And then you see one store in between the old Kresge building and Newberry's. And in this photo here, you also see one building in between. I think that may have been a bookstore, but I can't quite make it out. In this photo, the store in between was called Vanity Fair, a ladies' clothing store. But in this photo here, you can see that next to Newberry's is the Vanity Fair store. And then just beyond the Vanity Fair store, looks like it's perhaps vacant, or at least I can't see the signage on it. And then beyond that, there's another store, which would be Peck's. So in this picture, there's 1, 2, 3 stores in between the corner store and the old Newberry store. In the previous video, we saw Peck's further south down this block, but this was their original location on the block, and then they moved. And in this photo, you'll see that the building next to the old Newberry store is the American Theater. And I'm not sure exactly if this were for the early silent movies or if it was just an acting theater. Not on the scale of the Majestic or the Desmond, but perhaps like a small coffee house theater would be today with local talent. And while we're talking about theaters, let's just go across the street and I'd like to show you something. Most folks don't realize the Majestic Theater, how long it's been there. Look at the signage here. This is Huron Avenue when it was still a dirt road. I know we've already covered the Majestic Theater in a previous video, but I don't think I did it justice, so let me just share a couple more pictures with you. Before it was a movie theater, it was a stage theater, and the seating here was very similar to the Opera House, a very large auditorium. Pictured here is the cast of The Imaginary Invalid, a play that was presented in 1918 to benefit the war effort. The Majestic Theater provided the stage for numerous plays and used local talents many times as well. Here we see the cast, which are actually seniors from Port Huron High School back in 1960, presenting The Dark Lady of the Sonnets. Alright, let's go over to the west side of the 200 block of Huron Avenue. And here we have one of my favorite buildings, another building that's well over 100 years old. And as you can see here, it's been nicely restored. When I was growing up, it looked more like this. Not nearly as nice, but you could see the original building. And Mark's Jewelry Store was the only store I ever remember being on that corner. It was there for a lot of years. But later on, in the name of progress, they put all new fake facades on the front and covered up the old buildings. They look more like this. It seems like today there's a bank in every corner, but when the first Constitution of Michigan was adopted in 1835, it contained no provision relating to banks or banking. There were private banks in Port Huron in 1871. In the city directory here, you can see one by the name of John Johnson and Company, and another one, John Miller and Son. Later on, the state of Michigan required all bank corporations to obtain a special charter from the legislature. St. Clair and Port Huron both fought hard for that charter, but St. Clair got it because at the time it was the county seat. But that didn't last long. That bank wanted to make more money, so it moved to Detroit, and so the county was left once again without a bank. The charter was finally obtained in Port Huron by First National Bank. And as you can see here, it was right next to the United Cigar Store. First National Bank was established in 1870, but it was on the southwest corner of Huron Avenue. And then they decided to build a new building on that corner, and so they moved into temporary quarters across the street on the northwest corner, which is the building you see here. That was in 1879. In 1890, it was reorganized and the word exchange was added. Alright, let's get back to the first bank in Port Huron, First National Exchange, and let's look inside of it, see what it looks like. After the First National Exchange moved into their new building across the street, this building here was taken over by the German Savings Bank. And notice they took over the area where the cigar store was. And the area where the bank was now Sylvester Drugstores. It wasn't there very long though. It was taken over by the St. Clair County Savings Bank about 1906, 1907, someplace in there. In this photo, it's kind of hard to make out, but you can see the signage where it says St. Clair Savings Bank. And then, of course, the one next to it says Sylvester Pharmacy and then Springer and Rose. Eventually, that bank moved, and the Sylvester Drugstore expanded and took over the very corner there, so that whole end of the building was theirs, as you can see here. Here's a unique view of the side of the building. In this very early photo of Port Huron, taken about 1857, you see that corner was occupied by another building, and that was the Central Hotel. Here's a little better view of the hotel. These buildings here look like it was a Wild West town. Alright, let's get back to the current building that we're looking at, and these two stores right here, and what used to be there. Paisley Meat Market was there for quite a while, at least when I was growing up, and the next door, Springer and Rose, was there for a very, very long time, way before I was growing up. In this earlier photo, you can see that the original Sylvester drugstore was the first store, and the second store was still Springer and Rose. Like I said, it was there a long time. This is an ad that was put out by Knights of the Grip. Knights of the Grip was an organization for traveling salesmen. They put out a booklet every year for Michigan, and I imagine other states as well, that told what businesses they should look for certain things, like nightshirts, for example. Springer and Rose was a popular men's haberdashery, and occupied this store at 205 Huron Avenue for most of its 100 years. But it wasn't always there. At one time, it was at the opposite end of the block, as you can see in this advertisement. It was on the corner of Huron Avenue and Butler Street, or now Grand River. The proprietors were Ike Springer, Will Springer, and Aaron Rose. In lieu of cash registers, carriers ran on trolleys to the office, where change was made. You can see this office as we look at it here. It was on an elevated stand. The carrier trolleys were used until the store was sold in 1972. The apparatus was presented to the Fort Huron Museum of Arts and History at that time. Here you can see they had a very nice selection of hats. Alright, let's go back to the part of the building that used to house Paisley Meat Market and the original Sylvester drugstore. And here we see that it is occupied by H.E. Reynolds & Son, which is watches, clocks, and jewelry. Notice the large pocket watch they have hanging out front. Pretty neat. Also notice the address, 105, and this is the 200 block of Huron Avenue today. So at one time, this was the first block even. There was probably nothing on the other side of Quay Street much. And like I said before, it's what makes it difficult in identifying buildings. Sometimes the very same place will have two, maybe sometimes three different addresses. In the 1980s, I'm not sure what this location had in it. I can't quite see any signage on it. The next door, where Springer and Rose used to be, is at that time called Today's Man. Alright, let's look at the next building here. You see it's a much lower building, but it's an original brick building anyway. During my generation, it housed the Jew and Justin's men's store, Faulkner's bookstore, Peter Johnson's shoes, and Collins's. There was another store that you're all familiar with that was in this building, right about where Faulkner's is here. And that's this store right here. The store with the clock. Of course, you know it now as being in the 300 block of Huron Avenue, but originally it was in the 200 block. And when it was in the 200 block, it was also known as the store with the clock out front. Same clock. Even way back here, you can see that Mosher's was in this location. You can read the signage right there. They didn't have a clock then out front, but they do have a clock up on top there, as you see. It looks very similar to the clock that used to be over there by the watch store. And in this photo here, you can see they have their transportation parked out front. I think I'll end this video by taking a slow excursion down on the west side of Huron Avenue, the 200 block, and see what there is to see back in the early 1900s and what it looked like. In our next video, we should be able to finish up the 200 block of Huron Avenue.